Okay, so let's do The Promise, which is the latest from Terry George, who did such a brilliant job with appalling historical events in Hotel Rwanda. This tells another sort of somewhat hidden story from World War One. So we start in Armenia. Oscar Isaacs is a young student entering a marriage in order to secure a dowry that will give him the money to go to Constantinople to become a doctor. And he promises that he will return and that he will make a life that his parents and his bride will both be proud of. But in Constantinople, he meets and sort of somewhat inevitably falls in love with Charlotte Le Bon's Anna, who is herself involved with Christian Bale's Chris, who is an American trying to get the story on the broiling tensions between Turks and the Armenians. And then when war breaks out, everyone is caught up. But Isaacs' character, Mikhail, said he has made this promise that he will not turn his back on his past, he will not turn his back on his family, he will not turn his back on his bride. Here's a clip.
I have to go.
Mikhail.
I have to find them.
Mikhail, leave these people alone. You're safe in the woods.
No, I'm not safe. No one here is safe. Don't you see what's happening?
We've lived through these Turkish threats before.
Threats? They want us dead. I have to get us out of here before there's no time left. Trust me. It's all right. I'm getting us out of here.
The thing with the film is this: it's telling an important story. I mean, the story of the Armenian genocide has been told before to some extent. Atom Egoyan, when he made that 2002 film Ararat, was referring back to a 1919 film called Ravaged Armenia. And I remember when that came out, it was a film that found it hard to find an audience. There was a review by Roger Ebert, who I'm a huge fan of, that said that the problem with the film was that it was needlessly confusing. And whilst it clearly came from the heart, it was, he said, too much, too heavily layered, too needlessly difficult and too opaque. This goes very much the other way. It wants to tell an important story, and the way it wants to do it is by, adopting a very sort of populist format, focusing on these kind of interpersonal relationships, on a love story. It has fairly well-known stars, and it's a movie that wants to play in a sort of with its epic sweep to the widest possible audience. The problem is that in a way it ends up falling between two stools. The people who don't want to hear this story took against the film from the outset. When the film was first played, there was all these sort of negative votes on the IMDb, which seemed to be part of a sort of politically motivated campaign. On the other hand, some other people have claimed that the problem with it is that the love story feels a little bit soapy, and that somehow it feels like it's, it's resorting to a kind of middle-of-the-road melodrama as opposed to telling a tougher story. I think the honest truth of it is that, firstly, it feels like a film which has great integrity. I think it does. You can tell that it's made by people who want to take this subject matter seriously. Yes, there are some things in it that are that have elements of corniness in them, but I understand why they're there. As I said, the film feels like what it wants to do is to break through into being a populist movie about an important historical event. And there are individual things in it that I like. I think the performances feel very committed. It's very, very, handsomely put together. It's a film which is mounted. It's a fairly sort of lavish production, and it does have in its in its best moments a sense of historical sweep. The strange thing is that overall it is, and it's a shame. I think it is rather inert somehow for a story which is so traumatic and, it's so important. It does end up feeling like it's not quite engaging you in the way that it should do. It doesn't have quite the visceral grab that the film really needs to do. I think it's a perfectly legitimate thing to attempt to tell this story in a way which is very populist. I think the problem is that it doesn't achieve that mainstream popularity that it would need to make it work. There are things in it that are admirable, but there are also things in it which clearly don't quite work dramatically. And in the end, you end up feeling, well, okay, it's made with sincerity and it's made with a degree of integrity, but it just doesn't catch the audience in the way that it would need to. And there are sections in it which you end up thinking, why is this not more engaging than it is. And I think it is, it's that thing that it's trying to do two different things, and I'm not saying you can't do those two different things together, but it's not quite pulling it off. And I think therefore it becomes sort of rather harder task for the audience to become engaged in the way that I think the filmmakers want them to do.
So is the problem the screenplay then, or are you?
Well, you see, it's really, there was times when I was watching it when I was thinking, is this to do with is it to do with the performances, or is it to do with the writing? And I think in the end it is a combination of those two things. It is just a film that feels like it's pulling in several different directions and never quite manages to reconcile all those different elements. That said, I don't think it is without some merit, and I think there are things in it that are haunting. There's certain scenes, certain images which I don't want to refer to specifically, because if people will go and see it, I want them to find them themselves. There are certain things in it that are very striking, and actually I thought that I liked Oscar Isaacs very much. I mean, he's an actor that I find very I think he's a very interesting screen presence. So flawed. Very flawed in some ways, but also, admirable and honest in its intentions.